code base is shared amongst not just all software developers, but we're talking about security teams as well. Like it's a security team's code base as much as it is a software engineer's code base.
Welcome to Compromising Positions. I'm Leanne Potter, cyber anthropologist and head of security operations for a major retailer.
And I'm Jeff Watkins, a cybersecurity enthusiast and CTO for a major tech consultancy. Together, we're the tech podcast that asks non-cybersecurity professionals what we in the industry can do to make their lives easier.
And help make our organisations more prepared to face ever-changing human-centric cyber threats. So, who's on this week?
Well, this week we're joined by James Charlesworth, a seasoned director of engineering at Pendo with 15 years of experience in software engineering. James is also the creator of the Train to Code YouTube channel, where he shares a wealth of excellent training videos on software development.
In this episode, say goodbye to Git blame, building collaborative and secure software development life cycles. We will dive into some great topics aimed at saying goodbye to the blame game and hello to good app and product security.
James talks us through his process of building up cross-functional empathy between his engineering function and the security team, why the engineering team may not be the best team to speak to if you've got a lot of vulnerable code, and a step-by-step guide on how he excels in delivering product security in his organisation.
You might want a pen and paper or a keyboard handy for this one. There is a lot of great advice to take away.
Yeah, there really was. So sit back and enjoy our interview with James Charlesworth.
Can you tell us a little bit about what does a day in the life look like for you?
Yeah, so I'm a director of engineering at Pendo. Most of my career has been spent building like SaaS products. So first as a software engineer, then as an engineer manager, as now a director of engineering. And so I've been building like and shipping software products for most of my career. And that's what we do at Pendo as well. We help other companies improve their software products. So day in the life, my day is taken up a large amount with meetings, which I think a lot of people can sympathize with. But I like to think that I spend a lot of time in meetings so that the engineers on my teams don't have to. You know, like I'm a big believer in engineering leadership should be about hiring smart people and then getting everything out of their way. So I like to try to go to the meetings so that people don't have to go to meetings and they can spend time concentrating. So yeah, that's my day. It's kind of quite reactionary.
Absolute saint for doing that. I would like you to come and do my meetings for me instead, if that's okay. That's what your bag is. That's what I would prefer. But you've also got a YouTube channel, haven't you? Do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I have a YouTube channel called Train to Code. And this is coming out of, I really do believe in different routes into software development as a career. And it's something like I'm basically a self-taught software engineer. I did a degree in electronics engineering. So all of the software that I've learned, all the coding, I've just learned myself. And it's so easy to find resources on the internet. And it can sometimes be a bit difficult trying to pick out all the right things and trying to pick your own journey. Mm-hmm. So my YouTube channel is really just about like surfacing the most important things that people need to know for developing or, you know, growing in their existing career in software development. So it's really just a passion.
Yeah, I agree with that. I did do a computer science degree, but what it didn't do was actually teach me a lot about modern software engineering. So I came out with a good appreciation of how computers work, but not about source control, discipline, or anything that's actually useful in a professional software context. So I think it's great to have practitioner approaches, especially when there's a massive sea of material out there.
Yeah. Coding's a skill. I mean, that's why I called it Train to Code. It's not just a pun about trains. It's actually about like, this is a skill that you need to train on. And software engineering degrees don't necessarily teach you how to code. They teach you computer science, right? But, you know, computer science degrees anyway. So actually learning how to solve problems in different ways with code is a skill. And it's a skill that you should practice. People should continue to practice it.
It's definitely a skill that if you don't keep up, it atrophies as well. It's definitely something you've got to kind of keep up. And I got into software development using free online resources, much like the stuff you put out. And so the stuff you do really does change lives. And so I've watched a few of James's videos. They're really good to watch. So if you're interested in learning how to code, definitely check him out. And it's Train to Code, isn't it?
Yes, on YouTube.
So obviously you've got a lot of experience in the software engineering industry now, in the tech industry. And I'm guessing at some point you have had interactions with cybersecurity teams or cybersecurity professionals. And what has been your experience in that respect? And kind of what's been a challenge and what's been good?
The challenges with any inter-department or inter-team in collaboration is aligning priorities because, and this is true in basically everywhere I've worked, right? Like engineering teams have their own set of priorities and it's usually around, you know, creating a good architecture and doing things properly. And security teams have their own different set of priorities and product teams have different priorities and designers and often the business does. So it's all about aligning people's priorities into the same direction. And that comes from having empathy and understanding why the security team are asking for something to be done. And also the security team are understanding why engineers are trying to push in a certain direction. And so some of the challenges I've had are creating that common objective between two teams in two areas of the business. But yeah, like, and that kind of leads into how it works well. It works well when people listen, and it works well when people try and hear why another another team's trying to do something, trying to hear why an engineer is doing something and try and empathize with that goal, and then seeing if you can either explain what needs to happen or listen to what they're saying needs to happen.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. If we was to draw a word cloud from a transcript of all the recordings we've done so far, I'd imagine empathy and listening and sort of the messaging, that'd probably be the biggest bit on the word cloud.
It's interesting though, because we've just been talking about like picking up coding skills. Very few people teach you empathy in this industry. It's often put down as a soft skill, and I really don't like the term soft skill because it's actually extremely hard to master, but people just kind of take it for granted. Nobody's training people on how to demonstrate more empathy and how to go about that in day-to-day lives. It is really, really important, and it's important because it's something that a lot of people need to actively work on and need to actively take ownership of, I think.
I was speaking to a developer recently, and he talking about collaboration and things like that, and he said most of my day is just speaking to other people. The coding actually element of it is minimal. He said one of the biggest surprises of joining the software development industry was that actually the time on the keyboard was a lot less than he thought it would be. He thought he would just literally just be bashing out code. If it's an 8-hour day, 7 hours out of that day, and then maybe a few meetings dot around. But no, he says, the majority of my time is spent actually trying to solve this problem, not hands-on keyboards, but with other people. And I think that's a really lovely thing, actually. And I think that's probably the way it should be, because I know when, again, going back to my experience teaching myself how to code, coding in isolation is tough. And I think you get lazy, you can also, whether you get stuck on a problem, get really frustrated, and so just having that collaboration piece is just really important. And it was actually really nice to hear that someone was like, it's actually a nice part of my job.
And this concept of shared ownership of the code base, right? So especially in larger organizations, as you start to scale, you need to stop thinking of the code as like that engineer's code or that developer's code just because they may have written it. You've done a Git blame and you found out who wrote it. But actually, the code base is shared amongst not just all software developers, but we're talking about security teams as well, right? Like it's a security team's code base as much as it is a software engineer's code base. Everybody owns that. And so you need to treat it in this hyper collaborative way, because ultimately everybody's going to be looking after it. Everybody's responsible for anything that's wrong with it, and it's never one person's ownership and one person's responsibility.
I think that kind of leads on from when we discussed your train to code channel. Do you think it's important that security practitioners should also know how to code, even maybe ones who aren't necessarily say security architects or DevSecOps? Do you think it's important, and what language would you recommend for security people to kind of start to immerse themselves in to get a bit of an understanding?
Personally, I think everyone should learn to code. I think it's important for everybody.
I agree.
But I think it's important to get an understanding of the architecture and get an understanding of the code base. Okay, so you don't necessarily need to be able to code. A lot of hackers can't code. People can just do a lot of damage by just downloading scripts from a shady forum or something. So you don't actually need to be able to code, but it will help you gain an understanding of some of the ways these things are implemented. And it's the same as anybody, like managers, for example. It's like I treat it like that. Like engineering managers, I think, should know how to code, and they should know they should have an understanding of the code that they are working on, even if they're not actually submitting changes to it. And it's a similar sort of thing. So in terms of a language, like whatever language your company's code base is written in, I think would be a good start. Or Python. You can get along with just Python.
And I think I've put my sort of security hat back on. Really do recommend people in security learn Python, because it's just the amount of stuff that we could automate using Python, because a lot of the platforms we use, security platforms, do have the ability to call APIs. But what I'm seeing, and I have seen in my experience, is security teams spending a lot of time copying and pasting that information from a platform into an Excel spreadsheet when there's an API there that would just do that for you.
You can actually do Python inside Excel now. So I don't know if you've seen this, but Microsoft have announced Python execution in the cloud.
I have seen this and I'm a little scared, but yes, but that's by the by.
Also, I think it'd be very amusing that we have mandatory cybersecurity awareness training every year or something. Maybe for the security team, there should be mandatory code awareness training every year.
I mean, it's not a terrible idea, We're talking about empathy and understanding other people's priorities. The way to do that is to learn about other people's job functions. So there's obviously a very good focus on having engineers do security training, but having security professionals do a little bit of engineering training, it's the same sort of reason, right? Like it's so that we can all align in what we're trying to do in our own individual priorities.
And do you know what it reminds me of? Do you know when you go to a foreign country and you learn a little bit of the language? You don't have to be fluent in it, but how much people appreciate you can just ask for things and say, please please and thank. Just it doesn't have to be that in-depth. You don't have to be fluent, because coding literally is a language. You don't have to be fluent in it, but to be able to recognize some of the basics is incredibly important. It'll just make your life so much easier. And one of the things that I'm quite keen on is to have a DevSecOps function in the team that I run, and I really wanted to hire a developer to do it. And it reminded me a bit when I made this decision of, did you know the film Armageddon?
Yes.
Yeah, right. So there's a story, Armageddon. Ben Affleck turned around to the director and he said, this film doesn't make any sense, which is very true. Why would NASA train up oil riggers to be astronauts and they wouldn't train up astronauts to work an oil rig machine? I think it's Jerry Bruckheimer, isn't it? And I think Jerry Bruckheimer just said, fuck off, Ben, and then ended that conversation. But there are so many easy ways of doing this. Why are we kind of bashing our heads as an industry against the wall when it comes to things like insecure code? It keeps me up at night. It really does. And that's from someone who was a software developer, can read the code and stuff. I can't imagine how scary and unknown it is if you don't have those core skills. So I feel very strongly about not necessarily being fluent by any means, but oh god, there's so many free resources like yours, like free code camp and things like that. Find out what language you're using in your organization and just learn the basics.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just makes conversation so much easier if everybody's, like you say, like speaking a foreign language, okay? Like if you just know a little bit, then it takes away that first level of everything needs explaining, and it's only one level down that needs explaining. I think I've heard that about Armageddon as well, to be honest.
I love that. I love that story. It just makes me laugh so much. I have another question for you. So what do you wish the cybersecurity team would do to make your life easier?
I'm going to say the best thing a cybersecurity team can do to make engineers' lives easier is understand where we fit into the business and understand our priorities and understand that a lot of things are a product decision. So understanding our relationships with our product managers. I've seen this several times, not just at a current place, but lots of places I've worked, where there'll be a discussion between a security team and an engineering team about whether a certain feature needs to be done in a certain way. But really, there's a product owner who makes that decision. And they're having this conversation without the product owner. The engineers are trying to represent what the product owner's asked for, and the security team are trying to shut it down and say it's not secure. But you really need to loop in the product manager in that sort of situation. You need to have a conversation with the product owner because they're the creative ones that will be able to find an alternative. And so instead of sitting there, I'm going to say the answer to your question, I'm going to say just presenting problems. If you just present problems, then you're not going to get anywhere. You're just going to find issues with stuff. You need to also try and find solutions. You need to also say, we don't like the way this is working, but you could try this or you could try this. And that's where product owners can get involved as well, because they're the creative ones that can come up with loads of different ways of doing things, and 3 of them might be better than the other 1. So you can go for the 3 that perhaps at the start not priorities. So my biggest thing would, absolutely, like understand that engineers work closely with product, and this is specific to product security, but engineers work closely with product people and product owners, and the decisions are often a team decision, or they're often done by the product owner and not the engineer that you're talking to.
Do you think there's any other things that security teams misunderstand about what you do in a kind of a product function?
Misunderstand? I think it's an iterative delivery process, software engineering. And so because we don't get security teams involved every single time we do a small feature, then they only see these massive changes and they consider everything to be a massive big bang release. But I think what they need to realize is that these are small iterative changes. Like small things can be backed out. That's okay, right? Like we can go back and we can look at, they call it shifting left. I really don't like the term shifting left, by the way, because it implies that the right-hand side of the delivery cycle is not important, because it is also important. So it's kind of also taking up the left-hand side. Think of it like that. And I think that's really important, is that I think they sometimes misunderstand that we don't do these massive big bang releases. It's a cycle. It's a software delivery cycle. So put your hand up and get involved at all points during that, and the whole thing becomes a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back to your point about the product owner being the key decision maker, I actually think, and I have discussed this in other episodes, but for any listeners that haven't caught those yet, I think that's probably the reason why quite a lot of security champion programs fail, because when a cybersecurity person goes, there's a problem with the code, I'm going to speak to engineering about that. And they think that's so, and I'm going to recruit software engineers to be part of the security champions program, but they're not the one really who making the decisions. No. And I think it should be more emphasis placed on the product owner. So I was really pleased when you kind of confirmed that, because that's my kind of understanding of the hierarchy. And I think again, it's just down to not understanding levels of decision making happening at different point. And it's just, you need to be mindful of those. If you don't really know how teams are organized in your organization, then how can you actually find the right person to get your agenda in the right time, the right place?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important. They've got the right intent. Okay, so I've seen them in previous places, not probably for the same reasons you've just described, not been massively successful, but the intent's definitely there. And you're absolutely right. It needs to be. It's like a lot of these champion programs, right? Like a lot of companies are doing AI championing now, where they'll have a few people that are trying to improve the way you use AI. That's great. The intent is there. The intent's right. But you're right. It absolutely needs to be a holistic approach that considers stakeholders at all parts, and then make sure those stakeholders are brought on board as well. I think you're right though. Like if the code is there to execute on a software vision, okay, and so if there's an issue with the code, then there's probably also an issue with the software vision. There's probably an issue with the design, and so those people also need to be in the room. Very, very important.
Yeah, I think increasingly over the last few years, we've seen the shift. I think this is a healthy shift, a way to think about systems in terms of what the business needs and the data that comes from that, and what the user needs, and how we engage with them, and the systems in the middle being the kind of the necessary part, but not being the most important part.
Yeah, everything works together. Everything from business functions all the way down to the code, security, product design, user experience. These things all need to work together. I think one of the biggest problems with any of these kind of championships programs is only focusing on one part of that, or only focusing on one area, and it's not. It needs to be across the.
Yeah, absolutely. When we chatted for the first time before we recorded this episode, we talked a little bit about your engagement with your own security team. And spoiler alert, guys, you're doing a great job. You were very highly, highly praised, which is brilliant. So really pleased to hear that. And you highlight that your success was down to having product security teams that help you deliver projects. Now, I don't think the term product security, when I've sort of been discussing it in my area, when me and Jeff have done public speaking about product security, I don't think it's that well known. So firstly, what is product security, just for the benefits of our listeners, and why do you think that is a stronger way to embed security throughout the development lifecycle?
That's a great question. So product security in a nutshell is the security of your product, as opposed to like information security. So if you think of it, people think of InfoSec as like somebody's hacked into your organization and stolen all your employee data. Right, okay. But if your company is building a product, then the security of that product itself is product security. So if you can imagine like a product like Gmail, if you found a security vulnerability in Gmail, then you're not just attacking Google, you're attacking every one of Google's customers that uses that product. And so whenever they launch a feature in a product like Gmail, then you have to go through a certain product security process to make sure that all parts of the product are secure. And Pendo's like mission is to help companies become more product led. So product led organizations, then they revolve around the product. The product's the driver of the company. And product security is one of the most important parts of that, because you need the trust there with your products, just like with the Gmail example. Okay, if you break that trust with your users, then they won't use your product. And then if you're a product-led organization, then everything you're driving towards is in trouble. So product security is security embedded into the development lifecycle of the product. So it's security engineers doing reviews with product managers about new features. It's security engineers working with developers to make sure that they've got the right GitHub, to make sure they've got, for example, like MFA on their GitHub account and all these kinds of best practices, so that at every point in the lifecycle of your product's development, you're embedding security into it. And so yeah, like we have plenty of processes where we'll speak to security engineers. We have product security teams that will work with us to make sure that we're designing the product in a secure way and reliable way. And it's similar to kind of engineering operations and site reliability engineering as well. Like there's certain considerations you have to make when you launch new products or launch new features to your product. Security is at the heart of that.
Taking a natural extension from that is almost to bring security, bringing it into product security, is kind of bring it on into the like agile security. Dare I even say those words? It's actually bringing agility into security, which might, I don't know, strike fear into some people's hearts. I mean, have you found any, I guess, challenges or also interesting insights in when you actually start to make security more agile? Because traditionally it has been a kind of a bit of a throw over the wall process.
Yeah, the biggest challenge is knowing how much granularity to involve the security team with, because certainly in our case, our engineering team's in the UK, a security team are not in the UK, they're in other countries, and there's a time zone difference. You can't involve them in every single small little thing. And so the point of agile is just make small iterations, but you need to know like what is an iteration that requires a security review, what is an iteration that needs input at the design phase from security teams. And so yeah, like agile only works if everybody's on board of how quick an iteration should be and when you go back and do it things again, and how you introduce something small.
Into lean principles as well, the idea that decisions should be able to be made locally. And that can be quite tricky when the decision has quite large consequences.
Yeah, that's true. And one of the other challenges of Agile is this idea of like small incremental delivery. Often security vulnerabilities are not small things, right? So like you need to make sure that even the smallest incremental delivery is done in a secure way and is done to best practices and has got reviews and things. So yeah, in many ways that can make it harder. If you imagine we went back to waterfall development and everyone did one big bang release once a year, then in many ways a security review of that process is a lot easier because you just spend a week looking at it as a security team. But if you have to do that every single day for every single feature at the end of every single sprint, then yeah, it can be more of a challenge. But that's why it's important, as we spoke about before, it's important to empathize with security teams and development teams and product teams as well.
And I also think it's about empowering the engineering function to give us a hand with that. And again, a little bit of the onus is on us, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. But when I think of experts in the field, I don't think of maybe a security person who's never written a line of code as an expert in application security, but they're expected to be. So why don't they, the cybersecurity team, just think about, oh, well, I actually do have an expert here, someone who lives and breathes writing code. We don't leverage that. I think it's because there's still a little hangover of a lack of trust. And I think as soon as you start maybe building up that trust and just going, okay, well, maybe I don't need to check out every line of code, sat doing in a paired situation perhaps, and going, okay, so what's this code doing? And is this correct? And things like that. Because you just can't. You just don't have the time, the capacity, nor the expertise to do so. And so I think there's a lot to be said about yielding on other experts in cybersecurity, because the expectation, unfairly, I must say, is that the cybersecurity person has to know every little nuances about every area of tech. So, you've got your cloud, you've got your network, you've got your infrastructure, your engineering side, and then maybe even a little bit of compliance maybe as well. Like, does it meet all that? And that's a lot to take on, and it's a lot of expectation. You're never going to be great at everything.
I was going to say, well, like the opposite of that is we often expect software engineers to be experts in all of the security issues that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, right? And so yeah, they're not going to be experts on cross-site scripting and all these other different attack vectors and stuff like that. And I do think that sometimes there is a bit the expectation. And, you mentioned that word trust. Trust is broken when you think somebody should have done something and they haven't done it. And you think, oh, why have they not done that? That was so obvious. Why did you not do that? Maybe it wasn't that obvious to that person. And it's the same sort of thing, okay? So I think, yes, security professionals need to understand that software engineers are not experts in security. They're experts in writing code. You're the expert in security, so you're there to help them. And then software engineers also need to understand that the security professionals perhaps don't know the entire orchestrated, the way that your software's been deployed. And so you need to help them. You need to help them understand that. That's, communication is a really, really important tool. And then between the two of you, you have enough expertise to deliver a secure, well-coded product.
One can only hope.
Exactly. But
I think that's where the tooling really comes in. That will help you write secure code in the IDE. And I think that's just a really great opportunity just for learning. Because I know when I was a software developer running something, and then the error messages are just where you learn the most, I think, especially when you first start learning how to code. And I think these tools are really great for doing that and kind of embedding that security understanding right at the developer level and giving the developers autonomy. So I think if anyone is thinking, should I invest in a SAST tool or a DAST tool that does code reviews, I definitely recommend it just for your own sanity.
You touched on quite an interesting point there, though, because software engineers often do learn from errors. So you write some code that you think is working, and then you put it into production. Hopefully not production, but at some point in the future, after you've written it, you decide that actually there was an error and something went wrong. And security, the stakes are a lot higher because you can't be finding out that your code was insecure once it's in production and people have found vulnerabilities with it. So bring in that as early as possible. And software development is more efficient when you get that feedback from what's gone wrong as early as possible. Like you say, like in your IDE. So as soon as you've written, this is why I like languages like TypeScript, because as soon as you've written a line of TypeScript, it will tell you if you spelled something wrong. And so the earlier you get that feedback, the earlier you can fix for it. And security is exactly the same, but with much, much higher stakes, right? Like the earlier that you find out that you've done something that might be an issue, then the quicker you can fix it. So in your IDE, perfect. Yeah, completely agree with that.
Oh yeah, it's really good. And like I say, that autonomy piece is really important. But just because there's just not enough security people to go around anyway. So any kind of ownership into that early stages we can put back into the people actually doing the engineers. It just counts for so much in terms of time money, tech debt.
I think there's a certain element of there's two really big things around that. Is it almost feels like you're having pair programming with somebody who understands security. And the other thing is, I remember back in the days before we had good CI, people get quite defensive about what could seem to be opinionated matters, and they'll get quite upset about it. When your security tooling or your linter or something goes, no, you shouldn't do that. You just go, oh, I'll just fix it then. It kind of removes ego, but it also does build a shared understanding, a shared understanding of the language of security, which I think is a great thing. I don't think if you'd talked about putting security vulnerability scanning software 15 years ago, people would have gone, oh, that sounds rather heavyweight. But we just kind of accept it into our lives now, which is a good thing, I think.
Yeah. I mean, people stopped arguing about tabs versus spaces when linting tools just started picking one. Like if you work at Google, you use spaces, the linting tool tells you, and there you go. End of conversation, right? So you're right. Like people will stop having the conversation once it's just part of their daily lives and it's automated.
One of the things I want to talk to you about is, as I watched some of your videos, and you talked about in one cowboy coders, into cowboy builders. So, people who cut corners, risk taking, and things like that. And you said in the video that it's a skill level thing that you grow out of being a cowboy coder, and as you sort of grow through your craft, you become more experienced and more senior. And you said there's 2 ways to stop being a cowboy coder, and you said that's having processes and keep collaborating. So what kind of processes and collaboration can we help offer as security teams to help people get out of that cowboy mindset that might lead to more insecure code?
Processes are there for discipline, right? So processes they're not supposed to rule you. They're supposed to be there to remind you of what the best practice is. And so, yes, like for that kind of issue, then processes are what you learn from. And so processes are where it becomes a skill level, because you introduce a process that gives you a bit more discipline and you follow the process. And before you know it, you're a much more disciplined worker, essentially. And you use the analogy of cowboy builders, which is where I took the phrase from, which is a very British thing, I think, for our international listeners. I think there was a TV show over here called that, and that's where the phrase comes from. But the way to solve that is to put rules and regulations in place and put laws in place. And so with software engineering and security, process is like your rules and regulations, okay? So if you force people to follow a process, eventually they'll be brought on board to it either way, and it will become part of the way that they work. And collaboration can be part of that process, but that is also another thing that you can do, because it's very obvious if you've been cutting corners when you try and show somebody else your work. So if you do some pair programming, it's very difficult to be like cut loads of corners when you're doing pair programming, because the other person sat there watching you. It's a bit like when my wife watches me load the dishwasher. It's very difficult for me to load it wrong if she sat there watching me load it, because you just have a bit of accountability, and accountability is important, and especially with things like security.
I think pair programming. Problem is when pair programming was first introduced, the comments I got. So, I'm sure pair programming went back earlier than that, but certainly into the sort of early 2000s where people started trying to adopt it. It's like, well, everything's going to take twice as long to do because you've got 2 people to solve one problem. Well, that's not the case. And it's the same with TDD. It's like, everything's going to take so much longer. It might take a little bit longer to start with. It's going to be a lot. But I think overall, as we're maturing, thankfully, people are starting to actually buy into this. Genuine story. I had a client say many moons ago, I'm not going to name them. They said, we don't want any unit tests. Okay, but you haven't got any testers either. And they said, don't write any bugs into the code. I wish I was making that up. I wish that wasn't real. But that was a real thing that a real person said. That haunted me ever since. Thinking about their rules and regulations, kind of touched upon in some other episodes, and I think other chats had about things like GDPR fines and some of the other things like the digital marketplaces and digital products act. I think in the EU, and there's a whole bunch of stuff going around the world about kind of regulating, but like at the heart of it, to enter the industry, and this goes back to this whole self-taught thing, we're kind of unregulated, unlike quite a lot of other professions. Do you think it would be useful for us to be regulated, bearing in mind it'd probably up the bar for entry and also limit the number of people basically coming into the industry? Do you think it'd be useful or relevant for us to be regulated?
I mean, to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure how you could regulate it in a way that's meaningful and works. So the question's rather mute, because, I guess if you could find a really, really effective way of doing it, but I'm not sure that exists. And we're seeing a lot of this with the AI regulation that people are talking about, right? Like, how is it going to be actually possible to regulate this? Like, the intention's correct, but I don't know. I can't imagine a way of doing it that doesn't actually just inhibit innovation and inhibit progress, essentially.
UK government were looking to do the same for the cybersecurity profession. A bit like to be a lawyer, you have to pass a certain exam. You cannot practice law unless you're registered as. I think they were looking at doing something similar for cybersecurity people, but I think for your points that you mentioned, James, precisely like one, how would you do it? So they actually asked, how would we go about doing this and what would you like to see? And we were just like, I don't really know how you would even tackle this. Like, I understand the need.
So law is very slow to change. So you can pass the bar and you can qualify as a lawyer, and your lawyer knowledge will be valid for a very long time. Security professionals, if you go through your OWASP training and you look at all the things that are out there and you get your tick and you get your diploma, and then in a year's time, like there's so many new things that have come out and there's so many new technologies and there's so many new attack vectors. What are you going to have to pass an exam every year or something? I think that'll get prohibitively expensive.
I think the AI Act is a good case in point of that, because they got it all the way almost through, and then Gen AI landed and went, oh, Christ, it doesn't cover any of that. And they're having to go back, and the same with the rule book, which is much less restricted, but they're all having to go back and go, we need to rewrite some of this.
Yeah.
And this is the crux of, like, as a regulator, it almost does need some regulation, but almost feels like that it'd be like trying to nail jelly to a wall.
Yeah, I think it needs supervision and needs control, whether that's in the way of a legal regulation that's the way we've seen them in the past. I don't know. I mean, maybe, but I just can't imagine how it would work. I can't imagine how it would stay current and how it would evolve with, I mean, people that hack into systems and attack things, they're not doing anything regulated. They're moving really fast. They're innovating. They're being creative. They're definitely ahead of the people that are trying to defend against it. So you sort of need to move as fast as the other side, essentially.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that would put a kind of damper on things when it comes to trying to protect against these threats and attacks, because like you say, there's no ethics in what they do normally. I don't think they're going to wait for us all to get certed up to be able to participate in this.
Yeah,
so.
I'm not going to use this attack vector because the security industry hasn't regulated against it yet, so therefore I'm not going to do it. No, they're going to just do whatever they can.
There is no Geneva Convention for cyber warfare really yet, is there?
No, perhaps there should be. That's a very philosophical question, but yes, perhaps there should be.
I'm not sure anybody'd stick to it because the chance of catching cyber criminals is so minuscule that it doesn't matter if you commit a war crime because they'll never catch you, which is a scary thing to think about.
And will regulation of security professionals solve that? I'm not sure it will.
I just don't think it was feasible because, as you say, our industry, we've got an incredible skills gap as it is. We can't even fill the places we've got. Forget about even just thinking about diversity as well. And diversity with a big D, not just women in tech, but any kind of diversity. Can you imagine regulation just like stops people from entering the industry? We'd be snookered, absolutely snookered.
Especially when it costs a lot of money and a lot of people, you're basically putting a barrier to entry. Yeah.
But tech certs are expensive, but cybersecurity tech certs are just absolutely ridiculous. That's a proper wreck in itself and probably a conversation for another time. But
yeah, I think the intention's there, right? Like they're doing it for the right reasons.
Bring it full circle, that empathy and understanding. None of us want to ship out something that's insecure that'll bring either down the organization or our customers, ruin trust, etc., or make us unprofitable. Nobody wants that. So we've all got a common goal. It's just the way we go about it is a bit different. And I think if we, one of the intentions of this podcast is to bring new ideas and new empathy to the problems that we're having in the industry. We just take even a minute or two just to think about the other person that we're asking to do these complex security fixes, security controls, etc. Maybe not in the most human-centric way, then maybe if we do have these conversations a bit more, things will be easier, and security won't seem like this big scary department often locked behind a separate area of the building.
And this is what I'd say to your people listening to this. If you're getting pushback against something, so you want a load of work to be done to cover up what you perceive to be a vulnerability, then think about the other person's motivations and the pressure that they're under, okay? I say this to software engineers all the time with product managers. You often hear software engineers say that product managers are pushing them too fast or they're trying to get too many features out too quickly. But I always say to them, think about what they're also trying to achieve. Think about the pressure they're under and stop thinking about this as something that you should push back against, but think about how can you help that other person? How can you help actually reach their objectives? So if you've got software engineers that are pushing back against making what they perceive to be an enormous change, then work with them. Maybe there's another way you can do it. Maybe there's a way you can delay something. Maybe there's a way you can redesign something. Maybe there's other creative ways around it. Instead of just turning around and saying, no, this needs doing. I don't care about your own pressure that you're under, and I don't care about like what this is. If you don't do this, you're not doing the right. Yeah, that's just not very helpful.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. And on that note, thank you so much, James, for taking the time to speak to us. It's been really great. It made me think a lot, really did, about understanding priorities and that product security piece. And Jeff and I are very keen on that. We're actually in the process of writing a book on that very subject, because I remember Jeff has an amazing tech book library, and we were sat there one day and we just got all these books off the shelf about product and design, and I got a few security books out, and we couldn't find anything. In the product books, no mention of security, and in the security books, no mentions of product. And we just thought there's a big gap here, and actually this could really help move things along.
You're right. And especially as organizations do move to becoming more product led, and it becomes something that people take a lot more seriously, like customer driven product growth is really, really important. And yeah, security needs to be a part of that. You don't want to be outside stopping the car. You want to be part of it, like sat in the back seat, helping people go along, right?
Yeah, go on this crazy journey with them. If anyone wants to find you, how can they get in touch?
I'm on LinkedIn, just search James Charlesworth. I'm also on whatever Twitter's called these days, J Charlesworth UK.
And also your YouTube channel as well, so Train to Code.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for having me on.
Another great software engineering episode. They always seem to be quite popular. And James was brilliant.
Yeah, he really was. And I love the term git blame he used. And guess what? It's actually a real command. I did not know that. I'll put my hand up until we finish recording. So within the blame view, you can actually view line by line a revision history for an entire coding file. Now, I'm guilty of a bit of git blame occasionally. I have been tempted to go straight to the developer who did the last git commit and tell them I'm not very happy with their code, rather than kind of stopping to think more holistically about how we have shared ownership of the code.
Well, yeah, it's easier to blame an individual rather than think you're part of the problem. But I think James gave us some great tips on how to collaborate better in this space.
I'd also be really interested to hear from our listeners on the points we've discussed in this episode. Firstly, do you think that security people should know how to code, even if it's only a shallow understanding? And secondly, do you think that our profession should be regulated just like lawyers and doctors are?
Well, do let us know on LinkedIn or in the YouTube comments if you're listening to us on there. I'm really keen to hear what the mood is on those two questions.
Oh, me too. It'll be really interesting to hear what people think about this.
Links to everything James discussed in this episode can be found on the show notes. And if you like the show, please do leave us a review and share on LinkedIn or in your teams and subscribe. It really makes a difference to this content reaching more people, so we can all make our lives easier when we're facing this ever-changing threat landscape.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. See you next time. Keep secure and don't forget to ask yourself, am I the compromising position here?